The cotton fields of Vicksburg stretched endlessly under the Mississippi sun, white bowls gleaming like false promises of purity in a land built on blood and bondage. It was 1856, and 17-year-old Samuel moved through those rows with mechanical precision, his fingers bleeding from the sharp husks, his back bearing the faded scars of a whipping he'd received 2 years prior on a different plantation. He had learned early that survival meant silence, obedience, and the careful concealment of the intelligence that burned behind his dark eyes. Samuel had been bought and sold 3 times before Thomas Whitmore purchased him at auction in Natchez. The boy had watched his mother die of fever when he was 9. Her final words a whispered prayer that he would someday taste freedom. Since then, he had belonged to brutal overseers and indifferent masters who saw him as nothing more than livestock. But Thomas Whitmore was different, though Samuel couldn't understand why. The Whitmore Plantation was one of the wealthiest in Warren County, sprawling across 1,500 acres of prime cotton land. The main house, a Greek Revival mansion with towering white columns, stood as a monument to Southern prosperity and the brutal system that sustained it. Thomas Whitmore, a widower of 53 with graying hair and eyes that held secrets, ruled this kingdom with an iron fist softened only by occasional glimpses of an inexplicable melancholy. What Samuel didn't know, what nobody knew except Thomas himself, was that the boy working in his fields was his own son, born of a forbidden union with a slave woman named Mary, who had died shortly after childbirth. Thomas had been drunk that night, grief-stricken over his wife's recent death, and Mary had been kind to him in his darkest hour. The result was Samuel, a child Thomas could never acknowledge but couldn't bear to abandon. Eleanor Whitmore, 19 years old with auburn hair and eyes the color of morning sky, had grown up as the plantation's sheltered princess. Her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to navigate the rigid expectations of Southern womanhood under her father's distant care. Tutored at home, trained in piano and French, groomed to marry into another plantation family, Eleanor lived in a gilded cage, yearning for something more meaningful than afternoon teas and discussions of the latest fashions from Paris. Her first real conversation with Samuel happened on a humid afternoon in July 1857. She had been reading in the garden when she noticed him near the stables, studying a torn page from a newspaper that had blown across the yard. His concentration was so intense that he didn't hear her approach. "You can read," she said, not as a question, but as a quiet revelation. Samuel's head snapped up, fear flooding his features. Reading was forbidden for slaves in Mississippi, punishable by whipping or worse. He opened his mouth to deny it, but Eleanor raised her hand. "Don't lie to me," she said softly. "I've watched you. You trace the letters on discarded papers. You listen when my tutor reads aloud near the open windows." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the divide of race and class that governed their world. Then Samuel made a decision that would alter both their lives. "Yes, Miss Eleanor, I taught myself, from Bible scraps and old newspapers." "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Because words are the only thing nobody can take from me once they're in my head," he replied, his voice low but steady. "They can own my body, but not what I know." From that day forward, a dangerous friendship began. Eleanor would sneak books to Samuel, hidden in feed sacks, tucked beneath hay bales in the stables. They would meet in the abandoned tack room after dark, where she would teach him properly, correcting his pronunciation, explaining grammar and history and mathematics. It was forbidden, reckless, and absolutely necessary for both of them. For Samuel, it was education and hope. For Eleanor, it was rebellion against a system she was beginning to recognize as monstrous. "Read this passage," Eleanor instructed one night in the autumn of 1858, pointing to a page in a volume of Emerson she'd smuggled from her father's library. Samuel read haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. For nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure, and therefore a man must know how to estimate a sour face. "Do you understand what he means?" Eleanor asked. "That being different costs something," Samuel said quietly. "That standing apart from what everyone else believes makes you a target." "Like us," Eleanor whispered. "Meeting like this." Samuel looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not the plantation owner's daughter, but a young woman as trapped as he was, bound by different chains, but chains nonetheless. "Why do you do this, Miss Eleanor? If your father found out—" "Don't call me miss," she interrupted. "Not when we're alone. Just Eleanor." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I do this because I cannot bear the thought that human beings, people with minds and hearts and souls, should be treated as property. I do this because you're the only honest person I know." As the months passed, their bond deepened from friendship into something neither dared name. Samuel found himself thinking of Eleanor's laugh, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the compassion in her eyes when she spoke of the injustices around them. Eleanor, for her part, saw in Samuel everything the young men of her social class lacked: genuine intellect, moral courage, and a spirit unbroken by hardship. But they both knew the terrible truth. Their feelings were not just forbidden, but deadly. The South had executed slaves for far less than what they were doing, and Eleanor, if discovered, would be utterly ruined, cast out from society, possibly committed to an asylum for moral insanity. Thomas Whitmore watched his daughter and the slave boy with growing unease. He saw how Eleanor's eyes followed Samuel across the yard, how she found excuses to walk past wherever he was working. He noticed Samuel's educated speech slipping out occasionally, the boy's increasing confidence. Thomas knew he should separate them, sell Samuel to a plantation far away. But every time he considered it, he thought of Mary's dying face, her whispered plea. "Promise me you'll keep him safe. Promise me." So Thomas did nothing, caught between his secret guilt and his duty to Southern society. But the situation grew more dangerous with each passing month. In the spring of 1860, Eleanor's aunt arrived from Charleston to arrange her niece's marriage to the son of a prominent cotton merchant. William Hastings was 26, wealthy, handsome, and utterly conventional in his views on slavery, women, and the natural order of the world. He visited the Whitmore plantation for 2 weeks, courting Eleanor with stiff formality while she smiled politely and died inside. The night before William's departure, Eleanor fled to the stables where Samuel was repairing a broken bridle. She burst through the door, tears streaming down her face, and before either of them could think, he was holding her while she sobbed against his chest. "I can't do it," she gasped. "I can't marry him and spend my whole life pretending to be someone I'm not, believing things I know are wrong." "You have to," Samuel said, though the words tore at him. "What choice do you have?" Eleanor pulled back, looking up at him with fierce determination. "Run away with me." "Eleanor, no, I mean it. We could go north, to Canada. You'd be free there. We could be—" She stopped, the full impossibility of what she was suggesting crashing over her. "We could never be together," Samuel finished quietly. "Not even in Canada. The world wouldn't allow it. And even if we tried, they'd hunt us down. Your father would send bounty hunters. We'd be caught, and they'd kill me slowly while you watched." "Then what?" Eleanor demanded, her voice breaking. "What's the point of knowing each other, of these lessons, of any of it, if we're just going to live the lives other people chose for us?" Samuel cupped her face in his calloused hands, a gesture so tender and so forbidden that they both trembled. "The point is that we know the truth, that for a few stolen hours we were free. That's more than most people ever get." They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, balanced on the knife's edge between propriety and disaster. Then footsteps sounded outside, and they sprang apart just as Thomas Whitmore entered the stable. The older man's face was unreadable as he looked from his daughter's tear-stained face to Samuel's rigid posture. For several heartbeats, nobody spoke. Then Thomas said, his voice carefully controlled, "Eleanor, return to the house. Samuel, come with me." Eleanor's eyes widened with terror. "Father, please, we weren't—" "Go, now." She fled, casting one last desperate glance at Samuel, who stood awaiting his fate with the stoic dignity of someone who had always known this moment would come. Thomas led Samuel not to the whipping post, as the young man expected, but to his private study, a room no slave had ever entered. He poured himself a whiskey, drank it in one swallow, then poured another. Finally, he spoke. "I should have you whipped until you couldn't stand. I should sell you to the worst plantation in Louisiana, where they work slaves to death in the sugar fields within 5 years." He paused, his back to Samuel. "But I'm not going to do that." Samuel said nothing, confusion and dread warring within him. "Do you know why I bought you, boy?" Thomas turned, and Samuel was shocked to see tears in the older man's eyes. "Do you know why I've kept you here, given you light work, protected you?" "No, sir." "Because you're my son." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Samuel's mind reeled, trying to process what he'd just heard. That's not possible. Your mother was Mary. She died of fever when you were 9. Before that, Thomas couldn't finish. "It was once. Just once. I was drunk, grieving my wife. She was kind to me. And 9 months later, you were born. She made me promise to keep you safe before she died." Samuel sank into a chair, his legs no longer able to support him. Everything he'd believed about himself, his identity, his place in the world, was shifting like sand beneath his feet. "Then Eleanor is my half-sister." "Yes." Thomas's voice was heavy with old guilt. "Which is why whatever you're feeling for her, whatever she's feeling for you, has to end. Not just because society forbids it, but because it's wrong for other reasons." The revelation was a knife to Samuel's heart. The one person he'd allowed himself to love was forbidden to him on multiple levels, by race, by law, by blood. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Why are you telling me this now?" Samuel asked, his voice hollow. "Because war is coming," Thomas said. "The southern states are going to secede. The North won't allow it. There will be war, and I'll have to fight. Before I go, I need you to know the truth, and I need you to protect Eleanor when I'm gone." "The war will free us," Samuel said, a flicker of hope in his voice. "If the North wins. If the North wins, the South will be destroyed and chaos will follow. Eleanor will need someone she can trust, someone who loves her." Thomas met Samuel's eyes. "I know you do, and she loves you, but you both must understand. It can never be what you want it to be." Samuel stood, anger finally breaking through his shock. "You created this situation. You made me, abandoned me to slavery, gave me a sister I can't have, and now you want me to protect her while you go fight to keep people like me enslaved? What kind of man are you?" "A coward," Thomas said simply. "A man who made terrible choices and has been trying to atone for them ever since without having the courage to do it properly, but I'm going to try to make it right." He walked to his desk and pulled out a document. "This is my will. I'm leaving everything, this plantation, all my property, all my wealth, to you. If I die in the war, it's yours." Samuel stared at him in disbelief. They'd never honor that. A slave can't inherit property in Mississippi. "The will states that you are to be freed upon my death and recognized as my heir. I've had it witnessed by a lawyer in Natchez who owes me a considerable debt. It's legal, if unconventional. And Eleanor? She'll be provided for within your inheritance. You'll take care of her as I cannot." Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. "I know it's an impossible burden. I know I'm asking you to sacrifice everything, but I have no one else to ask." Before Samuel could respond, the sound of breaking glass echoed from elsewhere in the house, followed by Eleanor's scream. Both men rushed toward the sound, finding Eleanor in the parlor confronting her aunt, who stood over the scattered remains of a porcelain vase, her face twisted with rage. "I saw you," the older woman shrieked at Eleanor, "in the stables with that slave, embracing him like a common whore." "Aunt Beatrice, you don't understand," Eleanor began, but her aunt cut her off with a vicious slap across the face. "I understand perfectly. You've been corrupted, polluted by that animal. Thomas, you've allowed your daughter to become a disgrace. This is what happens when a girl is left without a mother's guidance." Thomas stepped between them, his voice cold as winter. "Beatrice, you will not speak of my daughter that way. What you saw was innocent." "Innocent? A white girl in a slave's arms? There's nothing innocent about it. When word of this spreads, she'll be ruined. No decent man will have her." "Then no word will spread," Thomas said dangerously, "because you will say nothing to anyone. You can't silence me. The church must know. The community must be warned about what's happening under your roof." What happened next occurred in seconds, but felt like hours. Beatrice turned to rush from the room, clearly intending to spread her gossip immediately. Thomas grabbed her arm. She struggled, screaming obscenities about Eleanor and Samuel, and then she collapsed, her face going slack, her body crumpling to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. The doctor, summoned urgently, confirmed what they all feared: apoplexy, sudden and fatal. Beatrice was dead, her final words of condemnation hanging over the household like a curse. At the funeral, Eleanor stood pale and silent while neighbors whispered about the tragedy. Samuel, watching from the slave quarters, saw how people looked at Eleanor now, with suspicion, with speculation. Beatrice had said nothing before her death, but her final confrontation with Eleanor had been loud enough for servants to hear, and servants talked. Within a week, William Hastings sent a letter breaking off the engagement. Within a month, Eleanor had been rejected by 3 other potential suitors. The rumors, though vague, were enough. Eleanor Whitmore was somehow tainted, unsuitable for marriage into respectable families. Eleanor bore it with stoic grace, but Samuel saw how it hollowed her out, how she withdrew into herself. They no longer met for lessons. They barely spoke. The revelation of their blood relationship had created an unbridgeable chasm between them, even as their feelings remained unchanged. Then, in April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, and the war Thomas had predicted began. Thomas departed for the Confederate Army in May, commissioned as a captain due to his wealth and previous military service in the Seminole Wars. Before he left, he called Samuel to his study one final time. "The will is in the top drawer of my desk, witnessed and sealed. If I don't return, you'll find allies in Judge Morrison in Natchez. He's a Unionist sympathizer, though he hides it well. He'll help you claim your inheritance." Thomas paused, looking older than his years. "Take care of her, Samuel. She's all that matters now." "Why are you fighting for the Confederacy if you don't believe in slavery?" Samuel asked, the question that had been burning in him since Thomas's departure was announced. "Because I'm a coward," Thomas repeated his earlier confession. "Because it's easier to go along with evil than to stand against it, even when you know it's wrong. Maybe especially when you know it's wrong." He met Samuel's eyes. "Don't be like me, son. When your chance comes to do the right thing, take it, whatever the cost." They didn't embrace. Couldn't embrace. Not in a society that would see it as master debasing himself before slave. But Thomas placed his hand briefly on Samuel's shoulder, a gesture heavy with everything left unsaid, and then he was gone. Life on the plantation changed rapidly. With Thomas gone, his overseer, a cruel man named Jessup, asserted more control. The work became harder, the punishments more frequent. Samuel, protected somewhat by his status as Thomas's personal servant, tried to shield the other slaves where he could, but his power was limited. Eleanor, meanwhile, found herself effectively imprisoned. With no male head of household, she was dependent on relatives who viewed her with suspicion. Her uncle Marcus, Thomas's younger brother, arrived to manage the plantation, bringing with him his wife Constance and their 2 sons. Marcus was everything Thomas was not: openly vicious, a fervent believer in slavery's righteousness, and deeply resentful that his older brother had inherited the family fortune. He immediately began searching Thomas's papers, looking for any leverage, any opportunity to secure the plantation for himself, should Thomas die. One night in September 1862, he found the will. Samuel was in the slave quarters when he heard the roar of rage from the main house. Within minutes, Jessup was dragging him from his cabin, rope already prepared for a whipping. "You think you're special?" Jessup snarled, tying Samuel's hands to the whipping post. "Think you're going to own this plantation? A slave? We'll see what you inherit after this." The first lash tore across Samuel's back, and he bit down on the leather strap they'd forced between his teeth to muffle his screams. The second lash followed, then the third. He lost count around 20, his world narrowing to white-hot pain. Through his agony, he heard Eleanor's voice screaming, "Stop! Stop this now!" She was running across the yard, her nightgown billowing behind her, but Constance and one of Marcus's sons caught her, holding her back while she struggled and wept. "Let her watch," Marcus said coldly, emerging from the house with the will in his hand. "Let her see what happens to slaves who get ideas above their station, and let her see what happens to white women who encourage such abominations." The whipping continued until Samuel's back was a mass of torn flesh and blood. When they finally cut him down, he couldn't stand. They threw him back in his cabin like a piece of broken furniture. Eleanor came to him that night, evading her watchful relatives. She brought water, bandages, and laudanum stolen from the medicine cabinet. Her hands shook as she cleaned his wounds, tears falling onto his torn flesh. "I'm going to kill him," she whispered. "I'm going to poison Marcus for what he did to you." "No," Samuel managed through cracked lips. "You'll hang. They'd love an excuse to be rid of you." "Then what? We can't just accept this." Samuel grabbed her hand with what little strength he had. "When the Union Army gets here, and they will get here, Eleanor, they will, you run to them. You tell them about the will. You tell them everything." "What about you?" "I'll survive. I always have." But even as he said it, infection was already setting in, fever beginning to burn through him. For 3 days, Samuel hovered between life and death. The other slaves, risking punishment, took turns caring for him, using remedies passed down from their African ancestors. Eleanor came each night, reading to him from the Bible they'd once studied together, her voice the only anchor keeping him from drifting away entirely. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Samuel woke to find old Moses, the plantation's eldest slave, sitting beside him. "Thought we'd lost you, boy," Moses said, relief evident in his weathered face. "Miss Eleanor, she been here every night. That girl love you something fierce." "She's my sister," Samuel said hollowly. "My half-sister. We only just found out." Moses was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know. Your mama told me before she died. Made me promise to look after you quiet-like." He shook his head. "But that don't change what you all feel. Makes it more tragic, maybe, but don't change it. What am I supposed to do, Moses? I love her, but it's wrong on every level. Even if we could somehow be together, we're blood relations." "Ain't no good answer to that," Moses said honestly. "Some things in this life just pure tragedy, and you got to bear them best you can. But I'll tell you this. When freedom comes, and it's coming, you make sure that girl is safe. Whatever else is true, you, her brother. You protect your sister." Samuel nodded, accepting the weight of that obligation. But he knew, deep in his heart, that what he felt for Eleanor went far beyond brotherly protection. A week later, Eleanor was gone. Marcus had arranged her marriage to a widowed plantation owner in Alabama, a man of 60 who needed a young wife to manage his household and bear him an heir. Eleanor had refused, fought, pleaded, but Mississippi law gave her no rights. As an unmarried woman, she was her male guardian's property to dispose of as he saw fit. The night before she was to leave, she came to Samuel one last time. He was still weak, barely able to stand, but he held her as she wept. "I won't go," she kept saying. "I won't. I'd rather die." "You'll go," Samuel said gently, "and you'll survive. Because you're strong, Eleanor. Stronger than you know. Promise me something," she said, pulling back to look at him. "Promise me that when this war ends, when you're free, you'll find me. I don't care if we can never be what we want to be. Just promise you won't disappear from my life completely." "I promise," he said, knowing even as he spoke that it was a promise he might not be able to keep. She kissed him then, a desperate, forbidden kiss that tasted of salt and sorrow. And then she was gone, leaving Samuel alone with his grief and his scars. But Eleanor Whitmore was more resourceful than anyone gave her credit for. The carriage that was supposed to take her to Alabama never arrived at its destination. Somewhere along the route, Eleanor had managed to escape, though how she accomplished it remained a mystery. Marcus raged and sent searchers, but Eleanor had vanished, and Samuel, questioned brutally about her whereabouts, genuinely knew nothing. He endured another whipping for conspiracy to help a white woman escape, but he bore it with grim satisfaction, knowing that Eleanor had chosen freedom over a living death. Months passed with no word. The war ground on, bloody and brutal. News trickled back that Thomas Whitmore had died at the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862, cut down by Union artillery. Marcus immediately declared himself master of the plantation, dismissing the will as the mad scribblings of a dying man with Negro blood poisoning his brain. But Samuel had already anticipated this. With the help of Moses and 2 other trusted slaves, he had stolen the will from Marcus's safe one night, replacing it with a blank document. The real will was now hidden in a sealed jar buried beneath the old oak tree where Samuel and Eleanor had once sat discussing philosophy. By the summer of 1863, Union forces were closing in on Vicksburg. The siege began in May, and Samuel watched from the fields as cannonballs arced through the sky as the great river city burned. Marcus fled to safer territory, taking Constance and their sons, but leaving Jessup and a handful of loyal overseers to maintain control of the plantation. The night before Vicksburg fell, the slaves began disappearing. Family by family, they slipped away into the darkness, heading for Union lines and freedom. Moses came to Samuel's cabin at midnight. "We're leaving, son. You should come." "I can't," Samuel said. "Not yet. There's something I have to do first." "That will ain't worth dying for." "It's not about the will. It's about making them acknowledge what they did, making them see that I'm human, that I always was." Samuel gripped Moses' hand. "Go. Be free. I'll find you when this is done." Moses left reluctantly, and by dawn, only a dozen slaves remained on the plantation, those too old or sick to travel, and Samuel. When Jessup discovered the mass escape, his rage was apocalyptic. He beat the remaining slaves viciously, demanding to know who had planned it, but no one spoke. Finally, his attention turned to Samuel. "This is your doing," he hissed. "You've been organizing them, filling their heads with Union lies about freedom." "I didn't have to fill their heads with anything," Samuel replied, his voice steady despite the fear thrumming through him. "Freedom isn't a lie. It's a promise that's finally coming true." Jessup struck him across the face with his riding crop. "We'll see about that. I'm going to make an example of you that every runaway will hear about." He ordered Samuel tied to the whipping post again, but this time he brought out a branding iron, the kind used to mark cattle. "I'm going to brand thief across your forehead," he announced, "so everyone knows what you are." The iron was heating in a brazier when the first Union soldiers rode into the plantation yard. They were a scouting party, 3 men led by a young lieutenant who looked barely old enough to shave. They took in the scene. Samuel tied to the post, Jessup with the glowing brand, the cowering slaves, and the lieutenant's face hardened. "Cut him down," he ordered. "This is my property," Jessup sputtered. "You got no right." "The Emancipation Proclamation gave me every right," the lieutenant said coldly. "This man is free. They're all free. And you, sir, are under arrest for assault." Within an hour, Jessup and his overseers were in chains, and Samuel was free. Free. The word felt unreal, too large to comprehend. He stood in the yard where he'd been born, where he'd been enslaved for 21 years, and he was free. The lieutenant, whose name was Garrett, studied Samuel with interest. "You're educated," he observed, noting Samuel's articulate speech. "And you're clearly a leader among your people. We need men like you. The Union Army is accepting Negro volunteers. You could fight for your freedom, really fight for it." Samuel looked at the plantation house, at the fields where he'd worked, at everything that represented his past. Then he thought of Thomas's final words. "When your chance comes to do the right thing, take it, whatever the cost." "I'll join," he said. "But first, I need to retrieve something." He dug up the will from beneath the oak tree while Lieutenant Garrett watched. When the officer read the document, his eyes widened. "This is extraordinary," he said, "and legally valid under both federal and Confederate law. Do you intend to claim this property?" "Eventually," Samuel said. "But first, I intend to help end the system that allowed it to exist in the first place." Samuel joined the Union Army and served with distinction for the remainder of the war. He fought at Chattanooga, marched with Sherman to the sea, and was present at Appomattox when Lee surrendered. He wore his uniform with pride, this tangible symbol that he was a man, a citizen, worthy of respect. But through it all, he carried Eleanor's memory like a wound that wouldn't heal. He made inquiries when he could, trying to find word of her, but it was as if she'd vanished from the earth. Part of him feared she was dead, had died in her escape or shortly after. Another part hoped she'd found freedom somewhere, had built a new life far from Mississippi and its horrors. When the war finally ended in April 1865, Samuel requested his discharge and returned to Vicksburg. The city was devastated, pocked with cannon holes, many of its grand buildings reduced to rubble. But the Whitmore plantation still stood, though Marcus had long since abandoned it. Samuel walked into the county courthouse with Lieutenant Garrett at his side, the will in his hand, and demanded to speak to the judge. The courthouse was packed with newly freed slaves seeking legal recognition of marriages, searching for separated family members, trying to navigate their new status as free people. When Samuel announced that he was there to claim a plantation inheritance, the room went silent. Judge Morrison, the Unionist sympathizer Thomas had mentioned, heard the case himself. The courtroom was packed with white citizens who'd come to watch a former slave be humiliated and denied. They got quite a different show. Morrison read the will carefully, examined the witnesses, and questioned Samuel extensively about his relationship with Thomas Whitmore. Samuel answered honestly, revealing publicly for the first time that he was Thomas's biological son. The courtroom erupted. People shouted about miscegenation, about the degradation of Southern manhood, about the end of civilization itself. Morrison gavelled for order, his face grave. "The law is clear," he finally said. "Thomas Whitmore's will is valid." Samuel Whitmore. He paused, acknowledging the shared name. Is the legal heir to the Whitmore plantation and all its holdings. The decision sent shockwaves through Mississippi. Newspapers across the South screamed about the outrage, the injustice, the unnatural elevation of the Negro race. Death threats flooded in. The Ku Klux Klan, newly formed, burned crosses on the plantation grounds. But Samuel refused to be intimidated. With help from the Freedmen's Bureau and the occupying Union forces, he took possession of his inheritance. The first thing he did was convert the slave quarters into proper houses. The second was to offer land and wages to any former slave who wanted to return and work as free laborers. Many did, including Moses, who became Samuel's foreman and trusted advisor. The third thing Samuel did was search for Eleanor. He hired investigators, placed advertisements in newspapers across the South and North, followed every lead no matter how tenuous. For 2 years, he found nothing. Then, in the winter of 1867, a letter arrived from a convent in New Orleans. Sister Mary Catherine, it began, though my name in the world was Eleanor Whitmore. Samuel's hands shook as he read. Eleanor had made it to New Orleans after her escape, had lived on the streets for weeks before finding refuge with the Catholic Church. Unable to return to her old life, unwilling to marry the man Marcus had chosen, she had taken holy vows and entered the convent. "I think of you every day," she wrote. "I pray for your freedom, your happiness, your safety. I heard about your inheritance, about your courage in claiming what Father meant for you to have. I'm so proud of you, Samuel, so proud and so heartbroken that we can never be what we once dreamed." The letter continued for several pages, alternating between joy at his success and sorrow at their separation. She described her life at the convent, the work she did teaching freed slaves to read and write, the peace she'd found in serving others, and then, near the end, "I know our love is impossible, forbidden by both blood and society, but I want you to know that it was real. What we felt, what we shared, was the truest thing in my life. You were my friend, my teacher, my confidant, and yes, my love. That you are also my brother makes it tragedy, but it does not make it less real." Samuel wrote back immediately, a letter he labored over for days, trying to express everything in his heart. He told her he understood, that he respected her choice, that he would always love her even if they could never be together. He promised to continue her work, to use his newfound position to help other freed slaves, to honor her values and her vision for a more just world. They corresponded for the next year, letters that were equal parts solace and torment. Eleanor's words sustained Samuel through the hardest moments of Reconstruction, when violent white supremacists attacked his workers, when crops failed, when neighbors spat at him in town. Her faith in him, her love for him, gave him strength to continue. Then, in November 1868, the letters stopped. Samuel heard nothing for weeks, then months. Frantic, he wrote to the convent repeatedly. Finally, the Mother Superior replied with news that shattered him. Sister Mary Catherine had died of yellow fever in October while nursing the sick in one of New Orleans' poorest neighborhoods. "She died as she lived," the Mother Superior wrote, "in service to others, with grace and courage. She spoke of you at the end, asking that we send you her final letter and her personal effects." The package arrived a week later. Inside was a small wooden box containing Eleanor's rosary, a lock of her auburn hair, and a letter written in her increasingly shaky hand as the fever consumed her. "My dearest Samuel," it began, "if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not grieve too long, my brother, my love, my heart. I have lived more fully in my 28 years than most people do in twice that time. I have known true friendship, genuine love, and the deep satisfaction of meaningful work. I have been free, truly free in ways I never was in my father's house." The letter went on to describe her final wishes: that Samuel continue the work they'd both believed in, that he live fully and without regret, that he find happiness even in the midst of tragedy. "You once asked me why I taught you to read, why I risked everything," she wrote near the end. "I did it because I saw in you everything I wanted to be: brave, intelligent, unbroken by injustice. You were my teacher as much as I was yours. You taught me what it meant to be truly human, to see past the lies society tells about race and class and worth. I love you, Samuel. I will always love you. And though we could never marry, never build a life together in the way we once dreamed. Know that you were my husband in every way that matters. My heart belongs to you, now and forever." The letter ended with a quotation from Corinthians. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Samuel sat for 3 days and nights in the room where Eleanor had once taught him to read, her letter clutched in his hands, silent tears streaming down his face. He grieved not just for Eleanor, but for everything they'd lost, all the stolen possibilities, the life they should have had if the world had been different. But he did not break. Eleanor had taught him to be strong, to endure, to transform pain into purpose. So he rose on the 4th day, placed her letter carefully in the box with her other effects, and returned to work. Over the next decades, Samuel transformed the 𝘾𝙘𝙖𝙞𝙣 plantation into a model of progressive agriculture. He paid fair wages, provided education for workers' children, and created a cooperative where freed slaves could purchase land at reasonable rates. He became a leader in Mississippi's brief experiment with biracial democracy during Reconstruction, serving in the state legislature and fighting for civil rights and equal education. When the Compromise of 1877 ended Reconstruction and white supremacists regained control of the South, Samuel faced renewed violence and oppression. The Klan burned his crops, shot at his workers, and demanded he leave Mississippi. But Samuel refused to be driven from the land his father had left him, the land where Eleanor had taught him to read, the land that represented everything they'd fought for. He lived to see the worst of Jim Crow, the systematic destruction of the gains made during Reconstruction, the resurgence of racial terrorism. He watched as the South built a new system of oppression designed to be as close to slavery as the law would allow. But he never gave up fighting. Samuel never married. He told people he was too busy with his work, too focused on his mission. But those close to him knew the truth, that his heart belonged to Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who was forbidden to him in every possible way, but whom he loved until his dying breath. In his final years, Samuel converted the old stable where Eleanor had taught him to read into a school for black children. Above the door, he carved a quotation that had been Eleanor's favorite. "For nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure." Beneath it, in smaller letters, he added, "But truth remains truth, and love remains love." Samuel died in 1902 at the age of 66, sitting in a rocking chair on the porch of the plantation house, Eleanor's letters in his lap. The night before his death, he told Moses' grandson, who'd become his closest companion in old age, about the love that had defined his life. "People will say it was wrong," he said quietly, "that it was forbidden, impossible, doomed from the start. And maybe it was all of those things, but it was also real, it was also beautiful, and it made me who I am." "Do you regret it?" the young man asked. Samuel looked out over the cotton fields, now worked by free laborers who owned their own homes and sent their children to his school. He thought of Thomas's confession, Eleanor's lessons, the war that had freed him, the love that had sustained him, the grief that had tempered him. "Not for one moment," he said. "Even knowing how it would end, I wouldn't change a thing." He was buried in the family plot next to Thomas Whitmore, his father and former master. On his gravestone, by his request, were carved the words, "Samuel Whitmore, 1836–1902. Teacher, soldier, freeman. Beloved of Eleanor." Years later, when the convent in New Orleans closed, Eleanor's effects were transferred to the diocesan archives. Among them was a small leather journal she'd kept during her time there. The final entry, written the night before she fell ill with yellow fever, contained a poem. "In fields of white beneath dark skies, two souls found love they could not claim. By blood forbidden, yet unwise to think that truth could bear no name. The world declared our love a sin, by race, by law, by kinship barred. But love cares not what rules we're in. It comes unbidden, wild and hard. If in the next life there's no chain of slavery or society's cruel arts, perhaps we'll meet in love again, just two free souls, just two pure hearts. The poem was never published, never shared beyond the convent walls, but it survived, a testament to a love that defied every rule, every boundary, every limitation that society could impose. A love that was impossible, forbidden, tragic, and absolutely real. The Whitmore plantation itself was eventually sold, subdivided, developed. The school Samuel built was destroyed during the violent reassertion of white supremacy in the early 20th century. The grave markers were vandalized and broken. The physical evidence of Samuel and Eleanor's story was slowly erased by society desperate to forget its own sins. But the story survived in family oral histories, in fading letters passed down through generations, in the records of that shocking 1865 trial when a black man successfully claimed a plantation. And though details were lost and distorted over time, the essential truth remained. That in the midst of America's greatest evil, two people found a love that transcended every barrier, even those of blood itself. It was a love that could never be consummated, never be publicly acknowledged, never be allowed to flourish. But it was love nonetheless, fierce, faithful, and enduring. And in their own ways, both Samuel and Eleanor lived lives of extraordinary courage and grace, shaped by that forbidden love into people who fought against injustice and served others until their final breaths. The true scandal wasn't that a plantation owner left everything to his slave. The true scandal was that the slave was his son, that the love story involved siblings who didn't know their connection until too late, that the whole tragedy was built on a foundation of rape, slavery, and the systematic dehumanization of millions. The scandal was America itself, a nation built on beautiful ideals and hideous crimes, where love and hate, freedom and bondage existed in terrible proximity. Samuel and Eleanor's story shamed Mississippi, not because it was unusual, but because it revealed truths the South wanted desperately to hide. That the barrier between master and slave was artificial and evil, that black people were fully human and capable of extraordinary achievement, that the system of slavery corrupted everyone it touched, creating tragedies and destroying lives across racial lines. Their love was impossible. Their story was tragic. But in the midst of darkness, they found light. And that, perhaps, is the greatest testament to the human spirit. That even in the most oppressive circumstances, even when every force in society conspires to crush it, love endures. Forbidden, painful, costly love that transforms both the lovers and eventually the world around them.